raised. Morning, happy Sabbath, and welcome. Today we're going to be having our religious panel, our religious liberty panel, and I'm going to be inviting the panelists up in one moment since I move stuff around a little bit. I know we have some visitors, so I want to extend a welcome to everybody that's visiting with us today. And we're going to be having 3 panelists today, and I'd like them to come up and join me this time. If you look on the screen, we have a couple of ways in which you can get your questions to us. First is the hashtag TAF RELLIB. That's the hashtag for those of you that have a Twitter account and have a way in which to tweet. The alternative for those of us that don't tweet, we've got the old school phones or cell phone, you can text in 336-543-0316. And Wi-Fi password below. So keep your questions coming. It'll be ongoing. During the panel presentation, questions will be projected up there as they're received in the back. So once again, I want to welcome everybody. We're going to start with introductions. My name is Carey. I'm an attorney. I've been practicing for about 13 years, and I taught undergraduate law for a number of those years. And right now I practice in High Point, and I'm going to start with a panelist in my immediate left and let them introduce themselves.
My name is Luke Woolley. I've been practicing for a few years less than Phil, about 3 years, both in Florida and North Carolina. And I went to law school at Stetson Law, University of Stetson Law in St. Pete, Florida. So that's all about me.
My name's Amy Townsend. I can't tell you how long I've been practicing. I graduated from Pepperdine University School of Law in 1999. So I've been practicing and doing some adjunct teaching at High Point University in the past, where I graduated from, as well too. So I'm currently not practicing, but in skincare now, but still keep up with my law license.
My name is Matt Stockdale. I am a graduate of Wake Forest University School of Law. I've been practicing for 16 plus years now, and I teach constitutional law at High Point University.
Okay, guys, thank you. I think this is the second time we've had this panel, and if you guys remember last time, we definitely encourage participation. Like I said before, we have the ability for you guys to tweet and text in questions, and we do want this to be a religious liberty discussion. I'm going to moderate. I'm going to allow the panelists to debate a few topics, but again, your participation is more than welcome. We do have some breaking news panelists. Last night or thereabouts, in the last 12 to 24 hours, newly elected President Trump issued an executive order that prioritizes Christian refugees and bans certain countries with predominantly Muslim populations from having refugees come to the United States. Now, if you recall, during the campaign, Trump was pretty famous for saying that he would do some limitations and outright bans of Muslims in different countries, but this is the first time we've seen some fruits from that, some actual action. I'll start out by kind of describing what an executive order is. An executive order is an order signed by the president, who, the president of the United States is not only the leader of the country, but he is the head of the executive branch. The executive branch of the government typically doesn't make law, but in his capacity as the leader of the federal executive, he can issue edicts and orders, particularly directed to federal agencies about how they should do their tasks or things that he thinks are priorities for them. This is a little bit different than what we've seen in most modern history, where he is saying that there should be a priority that Christians go to the front of the line of these countries when it comes to accepting refugees into this country. So what I would throw out to the panel is, should we prioritize refugees by religion or denomination? Is there anything problematic about prioritizing Christian acceptance into the United States?
Well, I'll start with a quote, probably a quote most of you should know. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. That quote on the Statue of Liberty. The statue that, as most of our forebears came to this country, they saw when they got here by boat. It was a symbol of freedom to come to this country and have a country where you could be free to practice whatever or no religion if you wanted to. To have an executive order that bans what would appear to ban a certain religion. It doesn't ban a religion, but by giving an exception to another religion, it sure looks like it bans a religion. I think probably goes directly against what that quote means.
Well, I guess we could start with saying, that we hope that, President Trump was doing this to secure our country, and we don't want radical, we don't want anybody coming over here to harm us. So when you look at an order like that, you might be thinking, well, hey, this is actually good for our country because it's protecting our borders. It's protecting people from coming over, and they happen to be Islamic, so maybe we should go ahead and ban them for now at least. Or it looks like the order is saying ban them now, and then some extreme vetting down the road. Maybe we'll open the borders up to them in the future, but we need to do some additional vetting. But there might be a question of the Christianity part of that, where the Christians might have preferential treatment to Muslims. I don't know.
Before I throw it to Amy, let me follow up with you a little bit, Luke. When you use the term extreme vetting, and I've heard that term before, maybe some other people have as well. Are we talking about a religious test in terms of a pen and paper test, or more background checks, or what might something like that entail if we're really interested in finding out people's religious beliefs? How might we actually go about doing something like that?
That's the question we don't necessarily have the answer to. How do we prove we're Christians? How do we prove we're Muslims? Do we just say praise Allah, or do we say that we worship Jesus? Or do we worship on a certain day? Those are the kind of questions we might have to answer in order to claim that we are a Christian or not. And who creates that test? Is the government equipped to do that? Those are a lot of questions we have to answer.
Well, I'm going to jump in. The Supreme Court has given us a test for most religion cases. My class just learned about it this week. It's called the Lemon Test, which comes from a Supreme Court decision, Lemon versus Kurtzman. The Lemon Test gives a three-pronged test to determine whether an action of the government is constitutional or not. The first prong is that it must have a secular legislative purpose. The second prong is that it must neither advance nor inhibit religion. And then the third prong is it must not foster excessive government entanglements. So when we look at this executive order, is it a secular legislative purpose? I'd argue that it is. In saying that it is a complete ban on all refugees from certain countries, that is secular. Now, on the other hand, I can make the argument that when you go make an exception to Christianity and get them to the front of the line, that is a religious legislative purpose. And based upon the Lemon Test, I think the executive order as it was without the exception is probably okay. But with the exception, I think it probably at that point violates the Lemon Test.
Amy, any thoughts?
Well, not going back to the lemon test or anything like that, but I think a lot of times when we make decisions out of fear versus decisions out of love, we tend to make decisions that, in the long run may not be the best decisions. And I know there's a lot of fear from a lot of people about people that we don't understand. one of my best friends in the world is Muslim, and I think when you know someone like that, and you understand their religion, they're one of the kindest people that I've come into contact, willing to give you the shirt off of their back and, really about hospitality for the most part. And so that's what I worry about. A lot of the decisions that we're making tend to be from a position of fear and not from love.
And I guess I will add one more thing to that, just kind of bouncing off of what you said. I'm sure a lot of you have heard the text where it says, love your neighbor as yourself. Love your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and your neighbor as yourself. Well, who's your neighbor? That was a question back in Jesus' time. Who was the Jewish people's neighbor? A lot of people thought, it wasn't the other Jews. Maybe it was Samaritans or other people, but a lot of people didn't think it was Samaritans. So when we think of that, and we think of like the parable, for instance, of the Good Samaritan, the Samaritans and the Jews were not friends. That was kind of like looking at the Muslims and the Christians today. Different religions, we don't necessarily agree on everything with each other. There's a lot of violence between the two. But Jesus gave that example and said this Good Samaritan is the example we need to live by. And therefore, we need to look at love and not so much on hate when it comes to these type of things.
And I think it's important to at least note kind of the scope of what we're talking about. I have some information here that 1 in every 113 people in the world have been forcibly displaced from their home. What that's saying is that on a global scale, there are many, many countries, many places where people are displaced from their homes, sometimes for long periods of time, never to return, either through war or other conflicts. And a lot of times the people that are seeking refugee status are seeking that status precisely because they have been persecuted, because they have been displaced, and they've had something out of their own control happen to them that kind of necessitates their moving. And that's something that maybe we don't empathize with as much, because in this country we really haven't seen that. We haven't had protracted wars on our soil for many, many years, and it's sometimes more difficult to kind of understand the plight of those people. But it's definitely, any other thoughts on that?
I think that I saw on Facebook quite a bit yesterday that in 1939, a boat of Jewish people were turned away from the United States. And they were sent back to Nazi Germany. Many of those people on that boat ended up in concentration camps. Many of them ended up being killed in concentration camps. And we did the same thing in 1939. We were afraid of people. And that fear led to the death of a lot of people.
And to follow up on your point, it was also by executive order that the Japanese internment camps were established. For those of you who don't know, during the same time, World War II, those of Japanese descent, or those that looked like they might be Asian or Japanese, were placed in camps. They could have been living in homes, being productive citizens, but taken from their homes and put into camps, into prisons, basically, being suspected that they may have sympathies towards the Japanese. And that was an executive order signed by the president. And that's not so long ago. There may be some in our audience that were alive during that time. So I think you raise a good point that sometimes these actions at the beginning seem to be something that's in the interest of safety, but they can turn into something quite different. Let me read something from the text of it. There have been Christians who are serial killers, shooters of school children, and rapists should be attach harmful behavior to a religion and say that religion is the cause. I think we're all familiar with the shooting in South Carolina, where this young man went in and killed and attacked people that were literally in church, a black church in South Carolina. Might that be an impetus to kind of limit those people, those adherents to that religion that perpetrated that crime? region. I'm just saying, I think the point that's being made is, how do we separate the individual actions of a person from a whole group or mass or religion of people?
And I think to go along with that, when you think of 9/11, the countries that those that were on the planes from 9/11, those countries aren't included in the ban. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Pakistan, they're not included in the ban.
Afghanistan, I think.
Afghanistan isn't on the
A
ban.
lot of them, yeah.
So why were certain countries chosen to be placed on a ban and others? I mean, I read an article, I think it was last night, that if you want to really protect from serial killers and terrorist attacks, who you really need to ban from the country are white males.
That's a different panel, Matt. We'll have to reconvene on that. Might have to get some sociologists or another discipline up here for that. But yeah, but you raise a good point. When you generalize and you cast a wide net, you can sometimes get in trouble. All right, let's move on to another topic. Again, coming from the new administration. The new administration is expected to support legislation exempting religious schools and organizations from recognizing and providing benefits to same-sex couples. The rationale is that religious schools could be punished by the withholding of federal funds under current law. Should the Adventist Church take a position on this? In other words, exempting religious schools from having to recognize certain types of federal law or certain things that they might find in conflict with the way in which they interpret their practice of religion, and giving them an exemption. So for example, let's say you had a hospital, let's say it happened to be located in Florida, and this particular hospital was religiously or denominationally affiliated. Could they have exemptions to equal treatment through their employees or providing health care benefits based on a religious exemption?
Well, I can think of one example right now. For instance, assuming a hospital is owned by, what's the religion with that doesn't leave blood transfusions?
Jehovah's Witness.
Jehovah's Witness. Jehovah's Witness were to own a hospital, then if they were to impose their religious beliefs on everybody in that hospital, that means nobody could get a blood transfusion. And I know for a fact, I've heard stories of different hospital administrators that are struggling with it when it comes to patients that are Jehovah's Witness or patients' relatives that are Jehovah's Witness that want to impose their beliefs on the patient. And that could be a little tricky to deal with. And there could be other examples. We have a pretty expansive definition of what can constitute a religion. And there's some pretty unique religions out there that may or may not discriminate against people and other things like that. We might have some conflicts within our own, within the Constitution itself with some of these beliefs that some of these organizations believe in.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
Imagine a private Christian school that teaches against homosexuality. The Bible says it's a sin. And one of their teachers comes out as being a homosexual. Shouldn't that school have the right to fire that teacher? I think most people would say yes. The danger is that if you do so, you're not discriminating against the person. And in doing so, you now face the potential consequence of having your nonprofit status stripped by the IRS based upon discrimination. That is what this First Amendment Defense Act is trying to accomplish. It's trying to protect businesses, individuals from there to be a consequence of discriminating. We can all agree that that school is discriminating, but they're trying to keep them from being punished for that based upon their religion.
that seems to be a worthwhile aim. Can anybody think of maybe a unintended consequence of that? Something that comes to mind is that I know many religions for many years, and I think to the minority of them to this day, don't believe in the mixing of races in terms of marriage or romantic entanglements. What if you had a denominational church that would prohibit employees from marrying outside their race or dating outside their race? Would that be protected activity?
It would be discrimination, but the First Amendment Defense Act would keep the government from punishing that.
Interesting.
And I think it would be a question that might go all the way up to the Supreme Court and say, well, is this in violation of the Constitution?
In other words, there are many activities in the Bible that the Bible prohibits or strongly discourages that employees routinely engage in, drinking of alcohol, even off hours. Different types of activities that may be clearly prohibited biblically, but are allowed constitutionally, that businesses then could discriminate and fire and hire employees based on that type of activity. So that might open the door for that. Let me take a question from the board again. This is kind of global. Why does religious liberty matter to America and the world? I think that's a good kind of overview.
I guess I could start by saying, when Jesus came to this earth, he taught the people about his love, God's love, and everything else. Never once did he get involved with the political system of that day. In fact, you guys might have heard the quote, "My kingdom is not of this world." He was so focused on the internal person and not the institution and institutionalizing religion. It was all about specifically separating those two. The religious things that are going on in a political sense, when he was not a part of. So he tried to teach us that we need that separation, that we don't need to focus on worldly gain, worldly power, or instituting that religion as the Jews wanted in that time, but to focus on the inward self and winning each soul individually, so that we're not focused on those worldly things.
And I think when we follow, Jesus' example, he didn't force religion on, anyone. I think it was, people followed Jesus because they saw something different about him. They saw the love that he had for, everyone around him. And then if we just look at the history, of this country, the reason why our ancestors came to America was, for religious freedom. If we think back, where we came from a country where if you didn't follow the religion of the king, it had dire consequences, including death. And so I think religious liberty is so important to us because that's what this country was built on.
I think often you hear that we need to become a Christian nation again. We need to get prayer back in school. We need to get this stuff back in school. And my argument is that we were not created as a Christian nation. We were actually created to keep us from becoming a Christian nation. Because we came here because we were being persecuted for our religion. So this country was never meant to be a Christian nation. It's a nation. We may be Christian, we may be Muslim, we may be Jewish, we could be any religion we want to be. And religious liberty means nothing if it doesn't mean liberty for all religions. So we were often a big fan of religious liberty when it's my religion. But when it's someone else's religion, well, I'm not so much a fan of religious liberty to other people. But if we're a supporter of religious liberty, we should be a supporter of liberty for all religions.
And I think that touches on an important point. It's a good segue to our next discussion. Because part of that question says, why does religious liberty matter to America? America is unique historically. There has historically been great entanglement between the church and the state. particularly in England, where there was a Church of England. And the political and religious spheres were very much intertwined. And if you found yourself on the wrong end of that, if you were a minority, if you were a Puritan or a Quaker, or somebody that felt a little bit differently, you know, working and owning land and participating in the political process was very difficult. So I think it's important to kind of recognize historically what America was supposed to be, what made it unique. And that brings us to our next point, which is a suggestion that the new administration may repeal the Johnson Amendment, which prohibits all nonprofit organizations from engaging in political campaigns or endorsing candidates. Right now, as it stands, a religious organization, their pastor or their minister can't get up on stage and from the purview of the pulpit endorse a particular candidate. There can be free speech about issues, but to specifically say this church, this pastor endorses this candidate, provide money and campaigning for that person, that is prohibited. And if a pastor or church were to engage in that, they would be subject to IRS and other penalties. Is there anything wrong with a church organization and their spokesperson endorsing a particular candidate, particularly if the candidate is a Christian candidate, or a candidate that espouses, you know, biblical views?
I think back, I was once a member of a very small church. It was a church that if one family was gone, you might not have anyone in the church. It was about 20 people on average were in that church. And one of the members of that church was the mayor of this small local town. And you know, why couldn't we as a church, there's only 20 of us, endorse one of our church members who was the mayor of the town? So I mean, I could think of a situation where, is there really that much harm in that? No, my reach at that point would only be 20 people. Probably not enough to even win the election in that small of a town. But you know, if you have a member of the church who's running for office, why couldn't you support that person?
I don't know, Luke, why?
Well, that's what you asked. I think of an example, you took a small example, but let's take a bigger church, like a mega church, like say Joel Osteen and his church wanted to sway an election in a local situation, and he said, you know, vote for me, you know, or vote for this other guy, because his religious views are in line with what we believe. Well, if you've got a majority, that could be an issue, and then you have somebody representing religion in politics. Again, that's a commingling of church and state. And then, you know, it's a slippery slope. That's a term we use a lot in law school and things where we talk about how you go down starting to think it's a good idea, and it just gets worse and worse and worse as it goes down. You don't see the consequences at the end necessarily, but in the process, if you get the oversight, you're like, oh, well, we don't need to go down that. I can think of an example of one of the biggest churches in the world, maybe the biggest, is the Catholic Church.
Oh, I didn't know that. Thanks for knowing that. When you say big, you're talking millions or billions?
You might know them.
Billions with a B. Billions with a B. So to your point, if there were candidates listed on an election slate and next to it was their religious affiliation, and we voted with our feet, we voted by numbers, there were Catholic, Baptist, Jewish, Adventist. I don't know if a lot of religions would quite do very well in an environment where we were voting by denomination. We Adventists would definitely find ourselves in a distinct minority. Let me ask Amy, do you think that having a church or a church spokesperson explicitly endorsing one candidate, particularly in local situations, is inherently dangerous, or is this just something, as Luke said, that can become dangerous over time?
Well, I certainly agree with Luke that it can become dangerous over time. I also think it can be inherently dangerous also. Again, referring back to, you know, the Catholic Church, you know, a lot of times the Pope is kind of viewed as a, as a godlike figure. And so if you have someone from that position that's saying, you should vote this way, or these are the beliefs that we want to support, you can certainly see that that can have not just a national effect, but kind of a worldwide effect as well.
Absolutely. There's a statement on the board there from, I think it refers to what we were talking about earlier, for SDAs who believe in the time of trouble, how can we expect asylum when we can't give it first? And I was referencing that earlier when I said that a lot of the refugees are those minorities. There are other religious minorities that aren't necessarily Christian. For example, you have the Kurds, you have different types of minorities within the faith itself that don't adhere to some of the more radical tenets that are being practiced in their region or their country. And because they don't participate in that radicalized version, they themselves are persecuted, often much more harshly than Christians or other religions, because they're kind of seen as apart. But these people are often seen as traitors, and they're seeking asylum precisely because they don't espouse those more radical beliefs, and they do become, our translators, our liaisons, our people that give us a window into that world. And so I think that's a good point. Oh, there's another one. I look back and there's another one popped up. Aren't there examples in the Bible where God destroyed a group of people who were not following Him? How is this related to today's world in regard to vetting? So I think you're referencing the Old Testament, where God has instructed whole groups of people to be wiped out by the Israelites when they're conquering kind of a new area. How is that related to vetting? Do you want to take that one? It's directly related to vetting. I guess the implication is that there could be group sin, or there could be groups that are singled out for some type of punishment. I guess the quick version of that would be that was God who has perfect vetting, and human beings are slightly less than perfect in how we pick who we choose to punish and when, under what circumstances. But I'll defer to the panelists on that.
I think you hit the nail on the head with that we aren't God. If God wants to choose a nation to punish, He certainly can. Nothing but what puts us in the position to be able to say that an entire religion or an entire nation is not worthwhile. I think that in every religion, you have good and you have bad. As attorneys, we say, well, there's good attorneys and bad attorneys. Don't judge us all based upon the one bad attorney you saw. In every religion, you have good people and bad people. You can't judge an entire religion based upon the good or the bad actors.
And I think even if you think back to, Sodom and Gomorrah, and you think of Abraham's plea, if there's one good person in the city, or I think it started with 10, but if there's one good person in the city, would you spare the city from destruction? And, God said, yes, I would, for one good person that's there. So we don't know the hearts of people, obviously, like God does, but I think there's mercy in that, judgment as well, too. God knows the hearts of the people that, He's judging. And if it's a people group that He knows, is just terribly in sin and there's no chance for them to come out of it, that's one thing. But you also have to remember, I think He says, if there's the smallest chance that there's somebody that can be saved, He would. And I think we have to think the same way as well, too. Can eliminate an entire group for the negative actions of a few of those.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point in reciting that story. I think it's instructive to remember that the children of Israel and the children of Abraham, they were the refugees, meaning they were nomadic and looking for a place to settle, both in ancient history and contemporary history after the Second World War. So who the refugee is can change, and we should be mindful of that, how we treat people. want to move on to another topic, school choice. Again, a new education secretary is expected to be confirmed. I think her name is Betsy DeVos. She's advocated school choice. What that is in a nutshell is parents would be able to send kids to private institutions, private schools, but get government subsidies and funding. Matt, I know you've had some experience with this with the TCA. Can you kind of give us a brief overview of how that works?
Yes, in North Carolina has this program. It's called the Opportunity Scholarship Program. And Tri-City Christian Academy has accepted students based on the Opportunity Scholarship Program. And how North Carolina's program works, if a student is under a certain family income level, they can apply. If they are approved, the parents then get to choose the school that they can go to. And the state will then will provide up to $4,200 per year for that student to attend a private school. So that would be $4,200 of tax dollars to do that. And there certainly is a benefit to that when you look at our public school system. You know, as a job as a DA in the public school system, I see almost every day drugs, violence, rapes, gangs. So the ability to send your kids to a private school, and if you couldn't otherwise afford it, to be able to have the state assist you to do so, is certainly a benefit. Just some statistics from North Carolina. In 2016, so this school year, there was $12 million that were given out through the Opportunity Scholarship Program. $11 million of that went to private religious schools. That dollar amount, the pool jumps to $25 million next year. They staggered it in. So you can see it's double next year what is available. So it certainly allows parents who otherwise wouldn't be able to get their kids out of public school, away from the violence, away from the drugs, away from the gangs, to get them into a better, safer environment.
Let me follow up a little bit on that. When this funding or this program, when private schools take advantage of this program, does the government have any influence on curriculum and content and what's actually being taught, on the way the school is being run, anything like that? Or is it strictly just monetary and then hands-off?
It is hands-off. And the reason for that is going back to what the lemon test is. You have the three prongs. Is it a secular legislative purpose? Does it advance or inhibit religion? And the third prong is where most of these come into play, in that it can't have excessive government entanglements. If the state of North Carolina came in and said, well, you have to use this book, you have to use this test, and you have to reach this score, and you have to do all this stuff, at that point, that's an excessive government entanglement, which would make that unconstitutional. So in North Carolina, their program does not have any strings attached. They give the money to the money is sent directly to the schools. The parents then endorse it over to the schools, and the schools can use it for what they see fit.
Well, Amy, let me ask you, would you have an issue with standardization of classes that, for schools accepting this money? For example, the federal government says we want all our students to learn as best they can. We want them to have a certain level of attainment. We're going to standardize what curriculum should be taught and what information should be taught, particularly in areas like math and science, things that will make us globally competitive. What might there be any issues with saying everybody's going to use the same science textbook or the same math textbook or anything like that?
Absolutely. I mean, I can think of just a personal example. Having come up through the school system, with dyslexia, I certainly had a lot more opportunities that were given to me to help, with longer testing times and things like that. Additionally, when I worked with children in the foster care system, I saw a lot of discrepancy between the ability to take tests. I mean, when you have parents who are using drugs, they're usually not teaching their children to read or helping them with their homework. at night. And so a lot of times we'd have children that, by no fault of their own, were extremely delayed, and that really needed those, what we used to call IEPs, or individualized educational plans, to help them stay on track and be able to keep up with, with the students in general.
Luke, any thoughts?
I think, generally the idea is good, that you've got this money that, like, I'm a product of private schools, so my parents, they pay taxes into the system and they got no benefit out of public schools. So taking that money and reallocating it sounds like a good idea. The question I have with it is, when we start entangling things, I mean, on the one hand, the standardized things that they start implementing, we need to have standardized math curriculum, standardized science curriculum. Science curriculum, we're going to have to teach evolution now. And then are they going to start chipping away at Christian beliefs and Christian creationism, or are they just going to keep them both there? Again, I'm talking about that slippery slope idea. There's a problem I see. The more that they put in there, the more that, nothing's free. I'm sure you guys have heard that now, that phrase before. They're not going to hand money for free without some kind of stipulation. Maybe not now, but maybe down the road. I just see that could potentially be an issue.
Right. So, Luke, are you telling me that my Daniel and Revelation class I took in my junior year at Forest Lake, I might not be able to get credit for that anymore? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Maybe so. Maybe down the road.
Maybe that's no better try to take that. Let me read from the floor again. If we see executive orders start affecting non-Christian religions, how could that start to transfer in the future to manipulate Christian religions and ultimately religious freedoms as such, as being able to worship on Sabbath? Let me try to condense that a little bit. What would prevent a president, any president, from issuing an executive order or a proclamation for a national day of rest? We had one last week. I don't know if you guys are aware of it, but we now have a National Day of Patriotism. That was an executive edict on Inauguration Day. What would prevent a president from issuing an order saying, look, it's good that we work and that we're productive, but it'd be nice that one day out of 7 we cease economic activity and businesses are closed and people aren't required to work, so they can have time with their families, go to church, do other, participate in other recreational activities. Would that be problematic in any way? Is there anything to prevent a president from issuing an executive order to that effect?
I don't think so, no. At this point in time, I mean, there's already things called blue laws that are on the books and have been tried, and tested, that say these things like, no alcohol till noon on Sundays and things like that, stores closing early, or closing altogether, different counties, different cities, municipalities. It's been held as constitutional. There's no problems with it because there's a secular purpose for it. It's not a religious purpose, is the way it's been ruled in the past.
Well, go ahead, Matt.
The Supreme Court has said that. I think the reasoning is flawed in that case. To say that, again, looking at the Lemon Test, constitutional law, I got to keep coming back to that. The Lemon Test, what is the legislative purpose? To say that there is a day of rest. Which day do you choose? Personally, I would like kind of Wednesday. I need to break it. But what day are you going to choose? All these laws that Luke's talking about is on Sunday. Well, what was the legislative purpose for that? Is it a secular legislative purpose? The legislative purpose was religious, so it fails the Lemon Test. If the Supreme Court followed the Lemon Test in that case, I think they would have declared those Sunday blue laws unconstitutional. But I think the Supreme Court didn't really want to go down that road. But they saw a slippery slope and they wanted to avoid it by trying to eliminate the slope. It was still slippery, they just wanted to get rid of the slope. So I think an executive order could be done in that nature. My hope would be the Supreme Court would stop.
Well, let me push the hypothetical a little further. Let's say that I owned a fast food restaurant that only served chicken, and I did not want to be open on Sunday for my personal religious reasons. And because it was working out so well for me, and economically it didn't seem to hurt me in any way, the federal government said, we want to implement this across the board, meaning that all fast food restaurants of this nature, in order to promote economic activity, to promote the health and welfare of their employees, and to enable people to have more time with their families, should follow that model. What would be so bad about kind of mandating a restful period for something that seems to be working, at least for one particular establishment?
What if I am an Orthodox Jew and I own a restaurant, and based on my religion, I close my restaurant on Saturday, but now based upon your law, I now have to also close on Sunday. So I have a 5-day work week, and everyone else has a 6-day work week.
You say that like it's a bad thing.
Financially, it was bad.
So it kind of mandate that those people, in order to catch up, in order to be competitive in any type of commercial environment, I mean, you basically wipe those businesses out, because they're working on a truncated schedule to try to get the same amount of customers and revenue. I do think it's interesting that the way the language is used, National Day of Rest, or National Day of Remembrance, or Patriotic Remembrance Day, doesn't really cover the full scope of what the intent is. And so sometimes we have to kind of pay attention to the words behind the word. The idea may seem attractive at first, but it can be difficult. But particularly in the South, I mean, people can notice that many places are closed. I think the mall goes at 6, maybe truncated hours, not a different place, but to nationalize it makes it take on a different character. Kind of getting towards the end here. If there's other questions, please tweet them in.
So before we move away from schools,
Okay.
I want to talk a little bit more numbers. I think we could agree that the Opportunity Scholarship Program is good. What if I were to tell you that the school in North Carolina that receives the second most students, second most dollars in 2016, this current school year, they received $373,800 of taxpayer funds. 90 out of their 147 students, well over half of their students. That school is right here in Greensboro, the Greensboro Islamic Academy, that teaches Islamic law, that teaches, if you believe that all those that follow Islamic law are terrorists, which some do, we're giving our funds, we're giving our tax dollars to that.
That's sort of interesting. So what you're saying is, in a roundabout way, the public sector and the public money is being used to fund private religious education.
Of the $12 million given out in 2016, $11 million went to religious schools. So 11 out of $12 million went to religious schools. And when they created the program, they knew they couldn't have those excessive government entanglements. So if you're a school and you qualify, you can get the funds. Doesn't matter what religion you are. Quite frankly, it doesn't matter whether you provide a quality education. If you can qualify as a school, you could provide a worse education than the public schools, but you can still get the money because there's no strings attached, because they can't put strings attached.
Because, right. So there's no quality check or any type of way to make sure that the dollars being spent actually produce an educational result, because in order to do that type of vetting or checking wouldn't create that entanglement. So what you have is actually a structure that incentivizes schools to get the money, but not necessarily put that money towards demonstrable outcomes.
If you can do great advertising and get the students there, flashy, great advertising, made people think you're getting a great education, but not pay your teachers to actually provide a great education, you can make quite a bit of money off of that.
The law of unintended consequences. Note on the board, Twitter is being silly. Please text in your questions. Twitter is being silly. Hypothetical for you, since I know you love them so much because you missed law school. If a primarily Muslim educational institution, a private Muslim elementary school, were to use the Quran as a textbook and was receiving public funds, no string attached, could they buy Qurans for their students if they use them as a textbook?
I think the answer is yes at this point in time. If you don't want to entangle religion with that, you've got to keep it separate. And you've got to let them do with the money what they please. You can't start directing it in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I think there was a case where they were trying to give textbooks to schools, just not the money, but just the textbooks, and they came back and the government said that's too much excessive entanglement between government and the religious institution.
So if we see a large order from TCA for messages to young people, we should.
Well, if they gave them if the government gave the textbooks, they can give the money, but not the textbooks.
Right, but the money could be used,
Of course.
for religious texts that they were used in instructional purpose.
Yeah, and I think generally, kind of bringing it all back together with all the topics we've talked about, is simply that try to make everybody understand that, as far as I understand it anyway, Jesus came to this earth with a separate agenda than what's going on with the world, what's going on with government. And I think we ought to take, as Seventh-day Adventists, as Christians, that same view, that we need a separation from the things going on politically, that we need to focus on, the inward person and not the political government.
We have a question on the board. Should churches and religious organizations have tax-exempt status? For those of you who don't know, churches and religious organizations do not get taxed in the same way normal for-profit businesses do. Part of the rationale for that is that they're doing community service, they're doing a lot of things that are not profit-generating activity, although money may flow through it, but it's not for the purpose of profit. What does the panel think about that?
Well, I think they should, as long as they follow the guidelines that are in place. One of those was the Johnson Amendment we talked about, was that as a religious entity, as a church, we can't endorse somebody. If you start breaking down that barrier, if they repeal the Johnson Act, and I can get up here next week and tell you to vote for so and so, or follow this, support this particular law, then should they yank my tax exempt status at that point? Probably they should, because that's breaking down that wall between church and state, which is there for a purpose. So I think as long as you follow what the guidelines are, tax exempt status is fine. But if you decide to not follow what they are, I think you're running into dangerous territory at that point.
Okay, we have a general question, maybe somebody knows. Where can we find more information about the schools that receive government funds in North Carolina?
Google. You can certainly go to the North Carolina Opportunity Scholarship website. They have a list of all qualifying schools. That particular website does not list how many schools, what schools receive what funds. But those reports are public, so you can certainly find them through different articles and different things out on the internet. Kind of going along with that for those that are interested. I talked about the number 2 school. Of the top 10 schools, 2 of them are Islamic. So, the danger with the Opportunity Scholarship Program is that as long as they don't attach any strings, I think it's constitutional. But when you do so, you're going to have schools that you may not like receive funds. If you don't want those schools to receive the funds, you then start attaching strings, which then makes the program unconstitutional. You got to choose one of them. You can't have it both ways. So ultimately, I think that the state of North Carolina, the way they have drafted it, they've drafted it so it's constitutional, but it certainly creates problems at the same time.
Related to that, someone asked, should Christian schools forego the federal financial aid funding as well as 501(c) funding to legally present their beliefs in teaching moral standards? As a quick note to that, the federal financial aid would not prevent a school from having certain moral standards in a student handbook or something of that nature. But I think what they're alluding to is that if there's more federal money poured into an elementary school or even a college, would then the federal government be able to influence or dictate certain types of teaching or curriculum as a result of that? Right now, that's not the case. But maybe, Amy, you have any thoughts on that?
Did you say Amy?
Yeah. Good heard from you about the you did.
No, but I was actually still thinking about the question before as far as 501(c)(3) or nonprofit status. There's a show right on TV right now with Freedom Community, I think, with the Scientologists and that religion. And, obviously this is from her perspective, somebody that used to be a Scientologist, but it looks like it was really a corporation that took advantage of that tax-exempt status to keep from paying, billions of dollars of taxes at the time. So I think that's a concern with the nonprofit status as well.
That's a very interesting case. They lobbied and spent a lot of money to ensure that they would have that status. It's an interesting case, Scientology.
Yeah, I think kind of going along with Scientology, going along with Westboro Baptist Church, Islamic churches, kind of going back to something I said at the beginning, religious liberty means nothing if it doesn't mean liberty for all religions. So if you are a supporter of religious liberty, you have to be a supporter of Islamic faith, of Westboro Baptist. Even though you may not agree with their actions, they have the right to do those actions.
And the Westboro Baptist folks are those that protest the soldiers' funerals when people are killed in action. They go there and yell at the family. So a lot of distasteful activity. But what you're saying is that the greater principle is more important than the individual distasteful activity that these people are participating in. Well, if there's no other questions, I think we'll wrap up. I want to thank everybody for participating, people watching on Facebook and on the internet. We hope to have this again and many other topics too. And I know it's a little bit different format, so I thank you guys for paying attention and participating. I want to thank our panelists. And